do that? I don't understand. Something like this, the information that you're going to put out tonight, Tony, is just, it defies any sort of, it makes my brain melt. Welcome to the show, by the way.
Welcome, gentlemen, and I do thank you for inviting me back, and I have my stainless steel bucket next to me to scoop up my brains, because you guys always blow my mind as well.
See, Kev? No, it's all Kev. I just make Kev's coffee. That's what I do.
Well, I mean, Tony, I'll let you present the new information, but I mean, it was bad enough when we were talking about energy levels of 13 tera electron volts. And we have to get it across to the listeners tonight. When we say tera, we mean trillion. Now, you're going to hear about another value tonight, which is peta. And that is quadrillion. What? Exactly, Joe. So I think, Tony, it's best passing over to you at this point, because you're the one that kind of put this to me. I've put it out in an article. You've put it in a video. Hopefully the word is getting out there. But things have changed if this power level that you're talking about is correct.
Yes, things are about to change dramatically. And yes, we have been operating under the assumption that the power levels later this year, when they begin colliding ions of lead, changing over from protons, was only going to max out at 14 tera electron volts. And that's what they've been putting out for public consumption. However, I've dug into some information that I've cross-referenced several times from different sources that indicate they're not going to 14, they're going to 1,148 tera electron volts. Translation into peta numbers, we're talking about peta electron volts of 1.15. That's rounding up from 1,148 tera electron volts. And like you said, we're moving from trillions of volts to quadrillions of volts. Just say a million times a million thousand. So quadrillion versus trillion is a big leap in power. I like to keep it focused at tera electron volts, so we're talking apples to apples.
Exactly. And one other way of thinking about it, guys, is it's almost 100 times the power level. Now, Tony explained there how he's been looking into this, and we've spoke of some time how they're going to be swapping out the protons for the heavier ions of lead. Now, my usual analogy that I share with people is they've been crashing cars, and now they're moving up to monster trucks. But it's how they're crashing them as well, which is very critical in all of this, because the protons, Tony, they were almost colliding at an angle, as opposed to the lead ions. And if you visit the CERN website, all the people listening out there, you'll probably see them talking about PB to PB, and that's the lead-to-lead collisions that myself and Tony are on about. And Tony, these collisions are going to be head-on.
Yeah, that's correct. It changes the dynamics completely.
Really? So let me just get this straight. So this is, they're accomplishing this by a couple of ways. I'm just trying to make sure that the listeners really understand is that first it's protons, then it's ions, different types of ions. And not only is that important, but also the trajectory at which they're collided. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you picture the detectors where they cross the streams, we always talk about the movie Ghostbusters.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this eerily brings up the scene of the containment system collapsing. I don't know why, but
exactly.
Ugh.
I know. We always seem to jump back to that every time we have our chats. And
absolutely.
It's predictive programming at its best. But yes, essentially you have protons that were crossing when they would take the two beams that are moving in opposite directions at near the speed of light, and within the detector, they'll cross them over at about a 45-degree angle, and they'll collide and they'll produce energy and all that wonderful stuff. But now they're taking the streams and bringing them head to head. And the analogy that I like to present is that now these ions of lead are so closely packed together into these beams that are moving in opposite directions, that essentially you now have two solid streams, two solid beams of lead, like pencil lead, coming together head on within the Atlas detector. And so all of the physics will change at that moment.
Oh, Kev, Quantum Kev, are you there? And are
I'm
you not
here
there at the same time.
No, I'm right here, and I think just to let the listeners put their brains back in for a second, we'll just run over the schedule quickly. And Tony, you've got that on the front page of your website, anthonypatch.com.
Thanks for that, Kev. I need that time.
Quite often, though, this site has actually removed a lot of the disinfo which is out there. And just now, Tony, they aren't actually colliding anything at the moment, are they? This is all going to start kicking off on the 13th of November, and then on the 16th, that's when they start the real collisions, isn't it?
Well, I'll correct the dates just a little bit. We're looking at November 20th and December through to December 13th. So November 20th, they'll begin colliding ions of lead, and that will continue, if the world's still here, until the 13th of December.
So what do you think the implications of this will be? And more importantly, why have they occulted this information from us? Because it's always been 13 or 14 that we hear from the spokespeople at CERN themselves.
Yeah, I think that what they're trying to hide from us is the actual energy levels that they have determined by studying the cosmos, by studying naturally occurring synchrotron energies. They are producing synchrotron energies with this machine that mimic what takes place in the cosmos. And they have determined that by studying what happens in the natural environment and the time distortions, the time-space distortions that take place naturally in the cosmos due to the curvature of space, they are actually trying to reproduce those energies that will also distort time. And that's the fourth dimension in our three-dimensional world. And that is the energy level they've determined that is necessary for opening the portal that they continue to advertise and promote as one of their goals.
Absolutely, Tony. And we've seen a republication of an old story relating to this, proving the other dimensions by detecting strangelets. I fell for the fact that I thought this was a new story, but you brought it to me, I think it was from April time, and it's interesting how all the mainstream media outlets, in particular in the UK, even after I'd put a video out and I'd retracted the info on the show, they're still going with this old info about the dimensions and creating portals. And I'm wondering if they're just getting the public ready for what is about to happen. And interestingly enough, when we've spoken in the past, on a metaphysical level, what we're dealing with now, we've also mentioned Saturn. That is where they want to create this connection too. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting, Tony, how we're now seeing almost some reaction up there on Saturn? The rings, for one of the first times ever, according to the scientists, they're showing a motion moving inwards. Now, usually the 62 moons that orbit Saturn, they make a natural progression or a ripple moving outwards from the planet, guys. But now, here we are, at a time that we were pointing to, we're seeing an inwards motion. And that's led these scientists to say it's almost like a physical structure exists below the atmosphere of the planet, Tony. Are we seeing the connection?
Absolutely. We are beginning to see the effects of what is going on with the Large Hadron Collider, because they have been doing some low-level ramping up of the magnets and ramping up of collisions and sending particles to what they call the north area, which is the center point of the main ring. And they're colliding into a fixed barrier, a fixed object, and doing low-powered experiments. They have gone to 13 tera-electron volts in these experiments into the north area. But there have been limited collisions taking place within the main ring itself. Basically, what they're doing is ramping up the machine, getting it ready, getting all of the instruments ready to receive and collide the lead particles. And even with the low-level ramping up of the power of the magnets and the other parts of the machine, it is already having a connection to Saturn and stimulating Saturn. And this sounds completely bizarre, but when we see the actual physical instrumentation, the results of satellite instrumentation at Saturn, indicating these changes in vibration, changes in frequencies, and changes in gravity, the rings being affected and beginning to vibrate, and even in their estimation, possibly a solid core that is spinning once per day within the planet. That's a little off. I do believe that it's the Birkeland currents that we spoke of before that connect the North Pole to the southern pole of Saturn. This is the twisted helix of two oppositely charged streams of electrical charges that move through in that helical fashion from the northern pole, which is a synchrotron machine, to the southern pole. And it is the southern pole that will connect to the synchrotron machine, the Large Hadron Collider on Earth. So we're already seeing the stimulus beginning with Saturn, and this is leading up to the plasma conduit that I call it, the Birkeland currents connecting the Earth to the southern pole of Saturn.
And Tony, since the last time we've spoke, we've had red auroras in the sky. Our own magnetospheres even starting to show a reaction to what is going on down below. Now, with this increase in power, I think it's kind of important we explain why it jumps so dramatically, because apart from the fact these things are crashing head on, it's all to do with something called the center of mass energy, Tony. Would you like to explain that?
Yeah, essentially what you're looking at is when you have a particle at rest, you have what's called its resting mass, and it has no kinetic energy because it's not moving. It doesn't have any momentum. When these collide, they have a combination of momentum, which is also described as tera-electron volts. Tera-electron volts applies to 6 different categories of measurement and analysis. One of them happens to be momentum. The other, it applies to kinetic energy, which means an object that is in motion has inherent energy within it as part of its momentum. And when it strikes another object, it transfers that kinetic energy to that other object. When you do that in a head-to-head collision, naturally you can see that you have kinetic energy coming together and multiplying, but not just by the square, but by the 4, by a factor of 4. If you will, in a quantum way or a quaternary way, you have a multiplication by a factor of 4, a quantum leap in energy that is produced.
Wow, Joe, are you getting all of this?
No. I mean, yes.
Yeah. You are, Joe, you are.
No, totally, man. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's hard. It's hard to kind of get it across to people that things aren't the way it is. You know, it's hard to try and explain things like, oh, the fact that Saturn isn't exactly what you think it is. You know what I mean? How gosh, 13 tera-electron volts to 1.5 peta-electron volts, right? So that's a big jump to just go from 13 to 1.5 like that. I mean, you know, normally you do a slow over time. To me, that's akin to, well, let's see here. If we detonate this atomic bomb, there's a 50% chance it will ignite the atmosphere and destroy every life on Earth. It just seems like it's that reckless.
It is that mindset, and you're exactly right. We're talking about Oppenheimer, Dr. Lawrence from the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory History, and Edward Teller from the hydrogen bomb. Yeah, it's the same sort of mindset in which they're saying, we don't really, and this comes right out of CERN. They come right out of their public relations department. They openly admit, even at 13 tera-electron volts, they weren't really sure what was going to happen. However, they proceeded forward, and now they're hiding this extraordinary jump in power from the public, and you can bet your bottom dollar, because that's about all we have left, that they have no clue what really is going to happen when they jump to this power level, although they believe they can control it because they think that they're reproducing and mimicking what happens in nature, as I said a moment ago.
Yeah.
Therefore, they think they can control it, and they think they know what's going to happen, but in reality, they haven't got a bloody clue.
Okay, so with that said, that's that's the equivalent of like, okay, 4th of July firecracker to detonating an atomic bomb. So, what do you see as the risks of conducting an experiment like this? What would you say some of the potential consequences could be?
Well, I'll borrow from a gentleman that we talk about a lot in this question, and that's Dr. Stephen Hawking. And he has said, even though he has not mentioned the 1148 tera electron volt level, he has said at the 13 and 14 tera electron that he says, he's concerned about black holes being created. But the more important one, the one that has some real validity to it in my mind, is his concern that it will cause a vacuum, what he describes as a vacuum bubble.
Oh, yes.
Created at CERN that could envelop the Earth and eventually could almost instantaneously, he says, change the entire universe by way of a vacuum bubble. That's how he describes one of the dangers.
Wow. Yeah, I've often heard that, it's a strangelet collector, and it's that the strangelets will collect at the center of the planet, and eventually you could have a singularity because you're just collecting so much, and the Earth kind of folds in on itself. I think
right.
So
that's the theory on creating a neutron star, is through strangelets collecting at the center of the Earth. Now, strangelets, as we've talked about before, have already been created at Brookhaven and have been created at CERN. Now, because in the Atlas detector, the collider, the point of collision of these ions of lead, already with protons, they have created strangelets in the Atlas detector. Now imagine what kind of strangelet production is going to take place with this higher power level within the Atlas detector, or Alice detector.
Here's another thing, too. I remember a ways back, they were talking about the Very Large Hadron Collider, the one that they wanted to build that was just astronomically big. But you don't see much posted about it in the last 10 years or so. And I wonder if they didn't figure out a way, and obviously now you're bringing, you actually bring some validity to this, to ramp up CERN to the point where they did not need to build a Very Large Hadron Collider because they have the technology now to modify the current existing structures, CERN, to be able to achieve these.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The super collider in Texas is the one that you're talking about, and was shut down. And some people are still saying that it's operational, which is complete nonsense. That's disinfo. However, your statement is pretty much right on the mark. The information that I'm presenting today comes from two studies primarily, but I've corroborated it and cross-referenced it with many others. One was authored in 2008 out of the German institute. It was the Technische Universität Darmstadt, and this one actually was in 2011. There's another that predates that in 2008. My point in citing those two articles is the fact that back then, as far back as 2008, they were saying that the machine is designed from the get-go, from the beginning, to achieve this energy level that we're talking about today.
Wow. So they knew this when they broke ground back in the 50s, that this could go on, but I'm sure that it would have probably, I almost look at it as being incrementally stepped up slowly to get people acclimated to this, and then all of a sudden, bam, they hit you with this, but by then it's too late, knowing full well that if it did come out that they were trying to achieve energy levels so high that there would probably be not just a backlash from at this time, independent media, that I don't think they could have imagined that there would have been this level of scrutiny back then today, but
right.
But on the other hand, I would have to think that more of academia would probably object to achieving levels that high.
Right.
There would probably be a lot more backlash, I would think.
Totally agree with your statement. I think that this has purposely been hidden so that there would not be that backlash from the general populations, but also from the scientific community, like Dr. Stephen Hawking. I believe that Hawking is fully aware of the information that I have, but he was, I think, kept quiet. He was told not to reveal this information. So you're right. I think they're so far along with their agenda that they don't care about showing and exposing what they're doing, except that they're holding this piece of information close to their vest until it's too late, until November. We're kind of jumping the gun on them a little bit.
Wow. Kev, just out of curiosity, do you think that once November comes along that they'll actually talk about this, or are they going to display that perhaps they're still testing at 13 tera-electron volts?
Well, if it's successful, I would imagine, and maybe Tony will be able to speak to this more, I expect we'll be able to see some kind of plasma connection in the sky if their plans come to fruition. Whether they succeed or not, I'm not too sure. But Tony, is there anything else we can look out for towards or come November time?
Well, I think, we've talked about terraforming and changes to the planet and the magnetosphere and earthquakes and volcanoes.
And we've got the strongest storm ever right now hitting the northern hemisphere at Mexico.
You got it. Got it.
So my question is, if it's successful, Tony, what is success in their eyes? What do you see as being successful?
Their success are two things. One is reconnecting to Saturn, and I know it. I always say that sounds crazy, but this is what their agenda is. They want to connect to Saturn, and the other is that they want to open that portal. And once they connect to Saturn, they can then open the portal and they can transfer the entities from Saturn to the Earth. And again, this is their agenda. I'm just the reporter. We will see.
We need to think other dimensions here as well, Tony, because it's not the Saturn that we picture right now. This is a multi-dimensional universe that we are in. And this is just one of the dimensions they're trying to pierce. Now, the other day, I seen they had calculated the energy levels to pierce or to work out basically that there was a 6th dimension and a 10th dimension. Now, that just suggests they're going into one dimension for these beings. And this is where we have to factor in where it gets dangerous. And I just call it the machine for obvious reasons. But we have the quantum computer aspect to this.
Yeah, the quantum computer, as we've talked about, already operates. It extracts its solutions from another dimension. And this is the quantum computer that will be facilitating the opening of the portal and then the maintenance, the maintaining of the opening of that portal. And this will also roll over into the New World Order system, the Mark of the Beast system, if you will, that will control everyone on the planet.
And Tony, I watched the creator of that machine, and I can't remember his actual name right now, but he was describing the quantum state of this computer, and he was telling people to think of another dimension that is absolutely identical, down to the atomic level, with this one. But the only difference is the qubit that we have on this end. And this is the guy that created this machine.
Again, they're not shy about sharing their information because their agenda is so far along. And the things that I have presented to you come directly from the manufacturer. This is not hyperbole on my part, making up things. Again, I'm just reporting the facts that I take right from the scientific journals.
And if we just kind of break it down before we go to break, just where we are so far, we've got this massive jump in power. We've got lead ions instead of protons. They're now going to be crashing head-on instead of sideways glances, if you want to kind of think about it that way. Then we talked about a connection to Saturn on another dimension. And now that brings into the story the quantum computer. And after the break, we're going to explain to you how we get from the quantum computer to these beings, these entities, actually arriving here. How will that work? Right now, they can't exist on this plane because our frequency, it just does not suit them for whatever reason. So they need a host. And Joe, that's where we're going to go after the break.
That's where you're going to go after the break.
I've not melted, but you watched the presentation that I'm talking about, or we're going to talk about, by a certain nefarious character called Dr. Craig Ventnor.
Oh my.
What a man this is. He's like a modern day, I don't know, Mengele or something.
That's right. And that's where your
character.
That's where you're going after the break, because I'm going to be on Sitchin's Kitchen watching all the action on the dark side of the moon while you guys handle that. I'm all done.
Absolutely. And of course, people, please visit Anthony's site at www.anthonypatch.com.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final section of tonight's Freaky Friday. Hours 1 and 2, Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman joined us to talk about the Giants. And then we have been joined now in hour 3 by Mr. Anthony Patch, www.anthonypatch.com. Now, before the break, I was kind of bringing us up to speed. We mentioned a guy called Dr. Craig Ventnor. Now, I'm going to drop in the chat Tony's latest article from his website, and I'll include it on the show notes for anyone listening to this later in the day. This is called In Silico DNA. Now, Tony, this is where we get into how bringing interdimensional beings onto this plane really can affect us, and how does this all come about? And you're the best man to explain this to the listeners who are craving this information right now.
Well, this is an article that I wrote for Paranoia magazine for their issue that just came out. And this has to do with digitized DNA. I'll cut to the chase. Basically, what we're talking about here is the ability for what we would call spirits, spiritual or demonic entities from another dimension being able to travel into our dimension. And they do that in a digital form, digitized DNA. Now, this isn't made up. This is what you mentioned, Dr. Ventnor, his Human Longevity Institute in La Jolla, California, have demonstrated repeatedly and successfully that they can take DNA and digitize it, and they can transmit it through the cloud and reassemble that digital information using, we can call it a 3D printer, but it's a sequencer, to reassemble that digital information into actual living biological DNA that then begins to grow. Picture that happening from one dimension into our dimension, in which that DNA then begins to grow when it's resequenced, reassembled in our dimension. And so you have the ability to transfer digitally spirits through a dimensional portal into our realm and then begin to grow.
And it doesn't even need to be into a host like a human or anything we recognize, Tony, because this Dr. Craig Ventnor, he cracked the human genome, published his own genetic kind of fingerprint online, and now he's carried on that research, heavily funded by the government, to the point where they can literally create anything. In the alternative media, we often laugh at the genetically modified experiments in the Crimeas of the spider goats, where we have goats that give off milk, but that basically contain the same things as the silk web inside a spider. Now, they can literally create any host they want, Tony.
That's true. And so we can have a existing hybrid body that is devoid of a spirit that can receive that digital DNA, or you can start from the ground zero and begin to grow DNA from scratch and create a life form of whatever it is that's on the other side.
I mean, Joe, this is literally a returning of fallen ones falling down to Earth via connection to a computer and then being printed into our reality.
I know, that's crazy. So see, now that's a whole other twist on things. Kind of the same idea. You know, when I was watching Dr. Craig Ventnor do his Ames Research Center's lecture, it was interesting because that's kind of the thing I thought, where, you know, oh, by the way, this has so much, anything with the powers that shouldn't be. You always notice, Tony, how everything is so multi-purpose, multi-use, all of this technology. You can go this way or that. Well, here, not only can we go ahead and download the information, download these entities from Saturn, and then, you know, have them manifest out. Let's print them out. You can also have, you know, the host bodies already ready to go for them to inhabit, and or, gee whiz, I really don't like that Kev Baker, so let me just go ahead, since we have his DNA already, we digitized it, let me just go print a doppelganger of Kev, and we will replace him. in the dark of night, and no one will ever know the difference.
That is very true. And this is not, and it's not science fiction, because all of this has been published out in the open. And all of these studies, all of this transmission of DNA and the reproducing of it in the laboratory, it's all done. It's all published scientific work. The scenario that I present in this article is one that you could imagine going to Mars. And instead of having a spaceship that has to take care of living humans all the way to Mars, you could send a very small spaceship to Mars with a resequencing reassembler machine, and that's only chip size. That's a computer chip-sized sequencer, and the raw materials, the 4 building blocks of DNA, to, let's say, Mars, and then send a digital signal comprised of digitized DNA that's been sequenced to Mars, to the assembler, and it begins to assemble DNA and it begins to grow, and then eventually you have your astronauts standing on Mars. So you don't need to send people.
You could even take it a step further than that and say, well, what's the Mars atmosphere like? Well, let's go in and modify the human genome so that the human being can live and thrive on Mars. And
that is correct.
And now you have your bona fide Martian. you know?
Certainly do.
Yeah.
You certainly do. Now let's flip that around and talk about what may come through the portal that's going to be created by CERN, and what is going to come through and then want to live in our environment, our atmosphere. Well, that's where we come back to the terraforming that is underway already with this planet through Fukushima radiation, changes to the magnetosphere, changes to the weather, earthquakes releasing more sulfur. That's a whole nother discussion. Releasing more sulfur into the atmosphere. This is a terraforming for a new life form that is going to come through and need to be able to thrive in a different environment than ours.
Wow. But of course, this is the funny thing is, it's all foretold. I kind of look at it like that. All this does is prove to me more and more that, wow, all this stuff is now coming to fruition. It can't be much longer. You look at this testing that's ramping up, and you want, is this the moment? Is this the moment when that event happens? And when it does happen, what's it going to be like? Or what do you envision, Tony, based on your research? These entities, what do you think they're going to manifest as?
Well, as you know, I am a born-again Christian, and Christ is my Savior, and, the Holy Spirit. And so at the end of this article in silico, I quote Revelation chapter 9, and there it talks about the opening of the abyss and what will be released. Demonic entities are described in Scripture as locusts and having breastplates of iron and this type of thing. Creatures that we have no ability to comprehend will be released from the bottomless pit. It says in Scripture that men's hearts will fail for what they behold. There is no way for us to wrap our head around what actually is going to be released from the abyss.
No, absolutely. Revelation 9, 1-12.
And Joe, the scientists at CERN, you can go and check this out on Google, whatever, My Search, whichever one you use. They even have pictures of them holding a key, and they're explaining how this is the key. And basically, we know now that this is the abyss. They're literally showing us that they're opening the gates to the abyss, and that is where CERN literally is built above.
Yep. Right? No, you're absolutely right, Tony. I mean, it's built on the Temple of Apollo.
Yep. It is.
That's crazy.
The worship of the sun god, and it is positioned over the doorway to the abyss. And it is a merging of the 200 fallen angels at Saturn with the entities that are in the abyss, and when they open the doorway, it fulfills Revelation.
And that's the thing. How and who in their right mind, just out of curiosity, would want to do something like that? It boggles my mind, because in a way I have to think that they know what's down there, if you know what I mean. They know what they're doing. So why? For the love of God.
They are suffering from the deception and the delusion that what they are doing is for the betterment of mankind, that these are benevolent entities that will solve all of the world's problems, in particular that they will be the benefactors of these benevolent entities and their technology, such that the elite, those in control, those power structure, will achieve immortality. Go back to Ventnor and talking about Human Longevity Institute, okay? They want and have bought into the grand lie from the Garden of Eden of ye shall be as gods, and that's what they believe they will accomplish.
Yeah, it almost sounds akin to the police state here that we see in the United States, where, you know, you have the local police playing the part of thugs, and they, you know, of course, they're doing it for the state, and they think that, yeah, you know, if we do the job for them, that yeah, when everything's locked down or whatever happens, that we'll be safe because we're on their side. But they don't understand that, you know, once you have no use, you ain't safe anymore. You know? And I think that's what these elitists are going to find out. These people that are actually running the show is that, yeah, that's what you think. But once you have fulfilled your purpose, you will be of little to no value to these entities. Yeah.
Agree with that scenario completely.
Yeah, it's
to let amazing. You know, guys, the chat room are absolutely resonating with the conversation that you guys are having right now.
It's like a bad Scooby-Doo episode. It really is, if you think about it, you know, where like the villain is openly telling the plan and everything like that. And in the end, you know, they're just totally floored and surprised that they were caught and foiled by those stupid kids, you know, and that's really what this is all about, is that, you know, you're being foiled. Yeah, we're exposing you, but at the same time, we're trying to tell you, look, stop, don't do this, because look what's going to happen. We know this. We've seen it on Scooby-Doo. Don't do this. It's a bad ending.
Well, it is. I think it's your mission and my mission, you know, with the group of us that talk together, that we are trying to save people, and we are trying to show people that you need to get serious about which side you're going to choose. And you know my beliefs and you know my direction, so I won't belabor the point. But the issue here is that this is real and this is tangible. We're not making up a whole bunch of nonsense. We're not connecting dots that aren't there. And this is going to get worse. We are talking about, yes, the end of days, and we are already beginning to see some of the changes that are occurring in the weather with this hurricane. We're going to see more earthquakes. We're going to see, you know, changes in the atmosphere with the aurora borealis, the establishment of a plasma conduit to Saturn. This is going to blow people's minds.
Wow. Kev and Tony, do you think that conduit is going to have an atmospheric effect that everybody would be able to behold? Or is it going to be something that you're only going to see in a certain part of the world?
Well, I'll take a quick guess first, but possibly. Yeah. Maybe it might look something like we've seen during the Norway spiral, Joe. I don't know. I think that was the closest thing maybe that we could compare it to. But Tony, your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. It will be like the aurora borealis, the northern lights, on steroids. It will affect the entire magnetosphere around the planet. It will light up the magnetosphere, and you will definitely have a visible beam or conduit. Whether we'll see the actual helical shape to it or not, I'm not sure. But there will definitely be a visible electrical plasma discharge taking place between the two planets.
And Tony, a lot of people out there will wonder, well, what can we do? Because we're giving them this serious problem here, and we like to offer solutions as well. And I was on a show today with Cherubim, who's in the chat room right now, part of the Goldfish Report. Now, there's a story circulating at the moment that a gentleman claims by the power of mass meditation, they were able to avert this kind of catastrophe back in August. The interesting part of the article really comes when it actually gets into the fact that it was through collective meditation. Now, being a Christian yourself and all the other different beliefs of people out there, be it prayer, be it meditation, some kind of thought process, maybe that can help. But is there anything else, Tony, or do you think we're down to that level now where we have to basically pray?
I think that's the level we're at. We need to pray. There is a tremendous amount of power in prayer. Whether we really know what God's plan is and his timetable is subject to conjecture and to, our own imaginations. It's very possible that through prayer, God will intervene and stop this machine in its tracks this year, that they'll never achieve the power levels that we're talking about, and there never will be a portal. However, we do have to look at Revelation. We do have to look at Scripture as our guidepost, as our window into God's plan. I will never set dates. I will never say definitively and dogmatically that I know what's going on. It's very possible that all of this could be disrupted through the power of prayer. However, at some point, the judgments that are outlined in Revelation have to take place.
I truly believe that as well, Tony. I mean, it seems to me that if you look at Scripture, things are fulfilling themselves. Basically, I don't want to say on schedule. Who the hell knows what the schedule is? But at the same time, everything has been like clockwork. You wonder if they're not going off that same schedule. They're like, okay, it's time. This is what we got to do. I also wonder, like, from a strictly technological standpoint, I just wonder how long it's been that they've had this information, that they've known. Like, for example, of course, all the information that you get, you derive from peer-reviewed studies, from all of the latest scientific works and publications that come out. So nothing that you're saying isn't something that academia is talking about. It's nothing that isn't already being, talked about as fact. But but the interesting thing is, it appears they've known about this for quite some time. Like you said, the 1950s, they knew what this machine was actually capable of. So it just makes me wonder, in that amount of time, like, have they made preparation? Is there a contingency plan? Let's just say the powers that be they don't seem stupid. So, well, I mean, I guess it's debatable, but I wonder if there's a contingency plan if they let whatever, and all of a sudden, oops, boy, they're a lot worse than we thought. What's plan B? I mean, do you think that's all their deep underground bases and getaways and hideaways? Could they be preparing for this event coming up?
Yes, I do believe that that's part of the reason for the deep underground military bases, is to shield themselves from what they are releasing, because they have no problem with seeing the rest of us wiped out. And then they think that they will emerge into this new environment, this new golden age that they are trying to reproduce. They truly believe that the golden age existed in the past and they want to reproduce it. And they think that through technology, they will emerge from their hiding places into an environment that they can thrive in, and that it will be exclusive to them, and they don't care about killing off humanity while they're underground.
And here's the thing, guys. I don't think this is new technology. Maybe the way we're trying to achieve it is a new way. However, we can look back at ancient civilizations, some of their pictures that they left us, some of the stonework. And we've even got something I was looking into the other day called Mount Meru. Now, a physicist took a look at the temple that was built there at one time and said, well, this is a particle accelerator. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if this information was information we always had. And then possibly we have the Nazis coming along, who got a lot of their information from something called the Thule Society. Now, they were talking to a breed of aliens, or a species of aliens called the Vril. And that's why we even seen Hitler taking a symbol like the swastika, bastardizing it, taking it from the good meaning it did have from ancient times, and then turning it into the image we all know it's synonymous with today. Maybe they got the information on just what energy levels they needed. They went away into World War II. They came up with the atomic bomb. They had atomic from somewhere, but it wasn't an atomic bomb they needed. It was subatomic they needed to go. Right. And that's what started the deep underground military base, and that's what started something like CERN. And maybe they've been trying to achieve this for a lot longer than we expect.
Yeah, you know what else? Let me just interject this too. Of course, not only did they have the nuclear bomb, but something that a lot of people overlook was the Foo Fighters. Mm-hmm. These balls of mercury being spun at high speeds, and they would light up like little orbs of light and follow the bombers and mess with the engines and cut them out because of the type of electromagnetic energy that it produced.
It's all about the spin, Joe.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Nazis had access to knowledge that, I had no idea existed until just recently.
See, Tony, like that. It's all about the spin, isn't it, Tony?
It is, because you guys have also heard about the Nazi bell, and that was using red mercury that was spun in opposing directions at high speed. And that was a very small particle accelerator. It was a very small synchrotron. And the first group of physicists that were working on this were killed by the gamma rays, which are synchrotron energies along with X-rays, killed by the gamma rays emitted by the first successful test of the Nazi bell. So scaled up, the Nazi bell is really the Large Hadron Collider.
Wow. Holy smokes. Yeah, that's crazy. But a compact
and remember that place we looked at one point, Joe, with the pyramid in South America? They discovered the deposits of mercury underneath.
Yes.
And when we talk about spin as well, Tony, that takes us to the quantum computer, to the qubit, because it's that spinning motion that makes things go quantum, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's one of the things, and we get into then talking about supersymmetry and quantum entanglement. And that definitely plays a huge role in how this machine operates. And quantum entanglement also applies to the discussion of communicating to the other side without the benefit of a portal. And then when you have the portal established, you utilize the same mechanism of quantum entanglement to communicate and maintain that opening of the portal.
Wow, Joe.
No, wow. I'm going to scoop my brain up.
This is just absolutely brilliant. But Tony,
this is great.
In the short time we have left, one of the things that really appealed to me when I first heard you on Clyde Lewis was the fact that you take this really confusing physics and you put it across in a manner that people like me and Joe and all the listeners out there can understand without having a PhD in astrophysics. Now we've got a few minutes left, and I'd like you just to reiterate the main points about the major announcement that you made at the top of the show tonight, and the fact that the energy levels that we've been talking about, well, they're now paled into insignificance.
Yeah, and the energy levels we're talking about now, 1,148 tera-electron volts, is something that has never existed in recorded history. And no one really knows what's going to happen. And this is coming about because we're colliding ions of lead at near the light of speed. And these are essentially solid streams of lead coming together. They're so dense and so closely packed together now. And what this means to us is it's going to have dramatic Earth effects, changes to the Earth itself and to the magnetosphere, as I said, around us. So I'm not trying to create a situation where people should be unduly fearful, but I am presenting information because I think with information people can make choices as to how they want to live their life, how they want to conduct it, and who they want to align themselves with.
Yeah. No, very well stated, and very important. That's the thing is that this is quite a jump. Again, I can't even imagine. Okay, boys, we worked to 13 tera-electron volts. Well, let's go to 1,150. Hey, yeah.
Joe, it's trillions versus quadrillions. It's another way, because I know people are going to struggle to get their head around this. But even if you write out the zeros involved here, it's 9 zeros versus 12 zeros. It's a big jump.
Right. It is a big jump. It's a very big jump. And I also like tonight the when you guys described it as two pencil leads colliding at full speed head on. Almost like two trains just going. just
That's
of
right.
lead. I mean, you're not talking about ions of, or protons or hydrogen ions or anything like that. You're talking about lead ions.
Billions of collisions a second, Joe.
Unbelievable.
We've talked about gravimetric waves, gravity waves moving through the planet and causing earthquakes. I don't think it's difficult to imagine that we are going to see some massive earthquakes take place when this collision takes place.
Isn't that interesting, though, that they've been hyping the big one in California now for quite some time?
And I'm glad Nano Girl has just tuned out 2 minutes ago, Joe.
Yeah, because I was going for that.
But before we go tonight, guys, I want everyone out there, stay tuned for Chris and Cherie Geo. But during the break, just take a quick moment, some quiet time, and send a prayer, some thought, some light, whatever it is you do, out to the people in Mexico right now. Because that storm really is bearing down on them.
Okay? Hurricane Patricia, 200-mile-an-hour sustained winds.
Yep.
The strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere.
Right at the time when the strongest man-made machine on Earth